The main reason that I'm doing this wasn't to lose weight, although that was incredible. It was the depression and anxiety. The very first day I did carnivore, the next morning, my wife said to me, "You didn't snore last night." And this was a contentious thing because I'd been snoring for years. I've been in for 2 different sleep studies. I had a CPAP mask on every single night, but I stopped snoring almost immediately on carnivore. 1 year into carnivore, I felt incredible, went to the cardiologist, and my congestive heart failure had completely reversed. I was able to get off of all of that medication. And the other thing that's crazy is I've had an irregular heartbeat since birth. I've worn probably 20 different heart monitors. It's completely normal on carnivore now. Initially, my why for doing this was overcoming the depression, losing the weight, all of those health issues. I've healed everything. I'm on no medications. I feel better than I have my entire life. Tell yourself the truth, which is I'm going to eat the most natural foods possible, given the options. I'm going to just do that for 30 days, and then you can do whatever you want after that, because you do not want to go your entire life having never felt this way before.
Kerry, let's start off going back a couple of years. Before you found the carnivore diet, give us a broad overview of where your health was at.
Yeah, before I found the carnivore diet, my health was not in a good place. Starting from high school, I started getting sicker and sicker. So it started with just gaining weight, obesity. I was diagnosed with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. I had just really bad anxiety most of my adult life that progressively got worse and worse, and that led to depression. Always had brain fog and fatigue, and started getting inflammation. And then a couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. I had to start using a CPAP machine. And while all of this was happening, I kept getting more and more depressed. The depression was really the worst of it for me. To the point where it just taken over my life, and I wasn't being a father to my children, a husband to my wife. The depression was really the worst of it. And the kind of big breaking point for me was about 8 years ago. All of these things just accumulated to the point where I was on 15 different medications, depressed, anxious, just sick all the time. And I was at home and I went to stand up and I got really dizzy. And I couldn't find my words, and my lips started drooping. I was kind of confused. And so my wife called 911, and they took me to the hospital, and I had a TIA mini stroke. And they diagnosed me with, they did a whole bunch of tests on me because they're like, wow, this guy has a lot of health issues for, I think I was 38 at the time. And they diagnosed me with congestive heart failure. My ejection fraction was 44. And yeah, that was a very scary moment for me, hearing those words, congestive heart failure. So lots of health issues that just kept piling up one on top of the other, and then just a cascade of medication that never really seemed to fix anything.
And the way I understand it, before finding carnivore, you found the keto diet, saw a little bit of light, but not enough to really break through.
Yeah, keto was such a big blessing for me. And I learned about keto through a documentary on Netflix a really long time ago. I never even knew what it was. And so I dipped my toes into keto, and then I went, full on into it. And it was the only thing in my life that ever touched my depression. I had this whoa moment, like this is doing something different than that medication. So it gave me a lot of hope. And I lost weight on keto. At my heaviest, I was 100 pounds heavier than I am now. And I've always struggled with obesity and my weight. And I remember one time doing keto, I lost about 60 pounds. And I felt better than I ever had. I started exercising. I remember my wife and I took a picture. We were on vacation, and I had my arm around her, and we were both kind of going through a similar journey. And I remember saying, I'm never going to gain this weight back. I feel so good right now. I finally figured it out. And I think it was about 4 months after that, I had gained all of the weight back and then some. So my issue with keto was I can't moderate. And it wasn't until I found carnivore that I realized a big component of this is addiction. And when I was doing keto, I would have some success, and then I'd try to go back to moderation. And it's like an alcoholic. It's like any other addiction. I don't think you can moderate an addiction.
Well, let's fast forward back to the point of finding the carnivore diet. Talk about what that was for you, how you came across it, and then take me through the early days and weeks when you transitioned.
Yeah, so when I found the carnivore diet, I was really at my lowest. I had suffered the TIA mini stroke, 100 pounds heavier, snoring every single night. I started developing arthritis. They diagnosed me with gout in my foot. This was about 18 months before I found carnivore. And it hurt so bad. Like I would step down on my foot. It felt like I had a fractured bone. I was using crutches for a while. When we would go to the grocery store, I was using a mobility scooter, and it wasn't because of my weight, although I was heavy, I could still walk. It just hurt so bad. All of this medication, the depression was getting worse. And one night my wife and I were watching YouTube, and a story came across my YouTube feed, and it was from a man named Dante Ferrigno. And he was talking about, he's going to do this carnivore diet. For him, it was the lion diet. He was only going to eat meat. And I was watching this guy, and he started listing all of his health issues. And it sounded like me. It sounded like he was describing me exactly. He had the depression, he had IBS, overweight, all of these similar issues. So I saw that, and that was the first thing that really gave me hope, because I'm like, this makes sense, right? This is just a ketogenic diet. It's just a stricter version, being carnivore. But this is insane. Like, this is nuts. You can't just eat meat. You're going to die. I have congestive heart failure. I'm going to clog my arteries if I do something like this. And my wife and I were watching this guy, Dante, and he looked really bad, really sick. And I noticed the video was 2 years old. And so I kind of cynically said to my wife, I'm like, let's fast forward. There's no way 2 years later, this guy's still eating meat. And so we did that. Fast forward, I went to his most recent YouTube video. Could not even recognize him. Completely transformed his body. But it wasn't just the weight loss. I mean, that's the first visual sort of thing. His face was just glowing. Smile on his face. Like everything had changed for him. And he was just so passionate and so fired up about it. So that was really my entry into carnivore. I still thought, this is absolutely insane. This is crazy. Even if I'm not going to clog my arteries, I'm going to get bored. Like, you can't just eat meat. This is just nuts. But I was so hopeless and so desperate, I was willing to try anything. And then I saw some of your videos, and I came across Dr. Ken Berry, and I watched about 1,000 of his videos. And ultimately, I'm like, I still couldn't wrap my brain around doing carnivore and eating only meat. But what I decided to do was, for 30 days, I'm going to just return to what is natural. I'm going to do a strict elimination diet. And I'm not going to eat any more seed oils. I'm not going to eat any more carbs, grains, any of this processed foods that have become normalized. Ultimately, I was pretty much telling myself, you're just going to eat meat, because that was kind of all that was left at that point. But I said, I'm going to just do it for 30 days, and then I'm going to go back to a ketogenic diet. And that's how I started.
All right, go through the early days, the transition into that diet, and how quickly you notice changes with that laundry list of health complications.
It happened for me really quickly. So this is crazy, but it's the truth. The very first day I did carnivore, the next morning, my wife said to me, you didn't snore last night. And this was a contentious thing, because I'd been snoring for years. I've been in for 2 different sleep studies. I had a CPAP mask on every single night. But I stopped snoring almost immediately on carnivore. And, since then I've done some research, and Dr. Jordan Peterson was on Joe Rogan. He said he stopped snoring the first week on carnivore. And I've talked to hundreds of carnivores since. A lot of people have. I never in a million years thought that I was snoring because of anything other than the fact that I was overweight. My neck was huge. The sleep doctor told me, he's like, if you ever want to stop snoring, you got to probably drop like 80 or 100 pounds. It's just you're overweight. But it wasn't that. It was just the inflammation from the foods I was eating. That happened really quickly for me, and that's probably not normal for everybody, but I was in and out of keto diets. But when that happened, Jesse, I was like, this is incredible, because over the years, whenever I would have a good night's sleep, which was very rare, I would notice the next day my depression, this crippling depression and anxiety, I feel a little bit better. So it's obviously it's tied into the sleep. So when my sleep started improving so quickly, I got very excited. And then a couple other days into carnivore, my stomach just started feeling so much better. The IBS I suffered from for years, it was every time I would eat something, I'd be in pain. And it would be this heavy, bloated feeling, but it was always painful and it always hurt me. And that went away pretty quickly on carnivore. So those were 2 things. And then a lot of the other things took a little while longer. But it was a couple weeks into carnivore where I had that moment I described earlier with keto, where it was like, whoa, something is going on here. My brain, my mood, like not that I'm saying in 3 weeks I completely overcame my lifelong depression, but it made a big dent in it and a noticeable dent in it. So that got me very excited as well.
Talk about what the diet looked like in the early days, because there is a wide range, even within such a limiting diet, carnivore. Some people include dairy, some people include eggs, some people are just red meat. What was it like for you in the early days? And then talk about any experiments you've done along the way and where you're at today.
In the early days for me, it was beef, butter, bacon, eggs. So no cheese. I had done cheese on keto and it stalled me out. So I decided to do no cheese. And in the early days, like the first week, I just committed, like, I'm only doing this for 30 days. And the other thing with carnivore, I'm like, this is going to be so expensive, but I'm going to allocate some of my budget to really treat myself the first couple days. What do I like best? A big fatty ribeye steak. So that was my first couple meals was I had ribeye and shrimp, and I'd eat bacon and eggs almost every single morning, ground beef and lots of patties. That was primarily what I ate there, and butter as well. And that was doing it for me. Like I was feeling really good. I'm over 700 days on carnivore now, so I have experimented. I have tried other things. The best I've ever felt in my life was when I go to the stricter version of doing lion diet, which is just beef, salt, and water for me. And I've done stretches of that in fact, I'm doing that right now again. I did that once for, I think, about 100 days. And energy, mood, everything. Like I feel incredible on carnivore. I just feel like there's a little bit more of an edge, like another 5-10% or something when I'm doing lion diet. That's been the primary that I've been doing this entire time. The biggest thing I've learned, or I guess that I've changed, is learning that there's a difference between a carnivore diet and what some, including Dr. Berry, call a proper human diet. So for example, my family and I went on vacation once. We went on a cruise. I couldn't have been more strictly carnivore on that cruise. Didn't have a single grain, fruit, vegetable, anything. It was just meat the whole time and eggs. But on the cruise ship, the bacon they were cooking, I later learned they were deep frying in seed oil. So it was about 3 days into the cruise, my depression started coming back, fatigue, the stomach issues. So it was very quick. So my thought on all of this has kind of evolved from, hey, I'm feeling really good, not necessarily because I'm eating meat and doing carnivore, but I'm eating the most natural foods that we have available given the kind of broken system we live in right now.
As you share that story on the cruise ship where they're deep frying the bacon and you don't know, it gets me thinking too about, and I've heard about this with carnivores, people becoming more sensitive over time. So when you begin to narrow that diet, eat a limited range of foods, even though they're high quality, nutrient dense, then going back and reintroducing some of the other foods that some people would consider healthy, you can react more than, say, the average person. How do you look at that piece?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I've heard that as well. I have been completely 100% strict on carnivore, other than the seed oil or unintended things. I haven't really reintroduced anything. Haven't reintroduced broccoli or asparagus or any of those things. But I have heard others that have and had similar experiences that you mentioned where, wow, this isn't like I remembered. Or people that have cheated on carnivore. I'm just going to have a little bit of pie around Thanksgiving. And they describe it as tasting artificial or like chemicals or just like overpoweringly sweet than what they remember. I think some of that is just our addiction where we build up a sort of tolerance to some of these things in the same way as if I drank alcohol my entire life and then quit and then had a little bit of alcohol, it would be probably more powerful than otherwise. For me, it's been a good motivator because the main reason that I'm doing this wasn't to lose weight, although that was incredible. I'm down 100 pounds since my heaviest. It was the depression and anxiety. And I would have given anything in the world to overcome that. So the thought of going back and having like a piece of pie or cake or something like that, and then potentially bringing that depression back is not something I'm going to do. So I've been particularly strict, but yeah.
On the carnivore diet, there is still quite a bit of room to play with the two macros of fat and protein. Talk about how you look at those and maybe play with those to experiment within that diet. And what I'm alluding to here and getting to is ketosis. I'm curious if you've tested it at all throughout your journey. Have you been in ketosis? Do you assume you're in ketosis?
Yeah, great stuff. So these are all things I learned. You've got so many great experts and doctors on. I'm just an individual. I've since learned a lot since doing this documentary and filming and talking to all these guys, but I have experimented. So for example, when I first started carnivore, I would melt my butter and dip my steak in it. And I've since learned that's not that great for me. My stomach doesn't like rendered fat. So that was one thing I learned about fat early on. Later, I learned just the importance of fat. I thought this is just carnivore. It's eating meat, right? You can eat any type of meat. You can eat chicken, you can eat fish. That's not really true either. If I were just to eat lean meat the entire time, I would really be suffering. It's really about fat. I've heard some of the good doctors say it should be called fativore, not carnivore. And that took me a while to learn, and it's so true. And what I've learned as well is I feel so much better when I up that fat dial and lower the protein dial. And I think that is due in large part to getting into a deeper state of ketosis or even therapeutic ketosis. I've got to get better at testing. I've had the Keto Mojo, but I haven't really used it at all. I have these things, and one of the things I love with carnivore is not having to measure anything. Even when I did a simple keto diet, I'm still counting carbs and tracking things like that. But I guess anecdotally, without proper measurements, I feel so much better when I'm in that deep state of ketosis. And that usually only happens when I reduce the protein and really focus on the fat and up the fat. Or when I've done several extended fasts as well, including one that I did for 8 days, where I know I was in a deep state of ketosis there as well. And nothing feels better in the world than that. When I was on day 8 of that fast, probably in the deepest, most therapeutic ketosis I've ever been in, I've never felt better my entire life. I want to do this forever. Unfortunately, I had to eat something at some point though.
Let's get into more details on the practical of the fat in the diet piece. You mentioned the fact that you used to dip your steak in butter. That didn't work for you, but you're still saying that including a good amount of fat is an important piece. How have you pivoted that within your own diet?
Yeah, so I've pivoted a lot in the diet. So one of the things is getting more fat just from the protein. So choosing the cuts of meat that are fattier has really helped me. Early on, I would have been like, ooh, tenderloin, that's so delicious, but there's hardly any fat in that. Or chicken breast I've eaten for years when I was doing a keto diet, primarily chicken, but there's hardly any fat on that. So making sure to get more fat through the actual, just natural animal fats has been the best thing. And then supplementing it with cooking has been another big thing for me. So cooking the steak, like I'll like to cook my steak low and slow, smoke it on the grill, and then I'll sear it in tallow and like a healthy amount of tallow. So getting the fat from that as well has been helpful. The other thing that's evolved on my journey is the way I eat the meat. So initially, it was more medium well. And as I've been doing more and more carnivore, it's gone from that to medium rare to even blue rare at times. I listen to the beautiful thing with carnivore that I love is there's so many fewer signals distracting me. So I can really tell what's working and what's not working and how I feel better on carnivore. So I've noticed that the more rare I go and the more fat I eat, the better I feel.
Do you also enjoy the taste of the meat that way better?
I do. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's taste and how you feel.
Yes.
Take me through a typical day. And I want to also talk about when you're eating. You brought up fasting, but what would it look like on a typical day? When are you breaking your fast? And then let's go through a day of meals.
So my typical day on carnivore has evolved, which has been another learning experience for me. So when I first started this, it wasn't uncommon for me to eat one big, huge meal every day. And that was it, one meal a day. And in fact, there were times when I was doing that where I'd forget to eat, where it was like, oh my goodness, it's like 9 o'clock at night. I haven't eaten anything today, but my energy was just through the roof. That was the thing that was most remarkable for me on carnivore instead of overcoming all of these issues I mentioned, just the energy has been incredible. Stay up till 2 a.m, like sleep less, and just have this endless energy. So when I first started carnivore, I had so much more body fat, and I've since learned like my body was burning that fat for fuel. When I got down to my goal weight and I lost most of that weight, I had to start eating more. So what I'm doing now has changed from earlier, but what I'm doing now is usually I break my fast around noon, and oftentimes that'll be with eggs and ground beef, depending on what I'm doing, if I'm doing Lion diet or not, eggs and ground beef or eggs and bacon. And then I'll usually eat again later, probably 5 or 6 hours later. And that will be my big meal. And if I'm lucky, that'll be a big fatty ribeye or a chuck roast or burger patties. Burger patties has been the main thing I've eaten on this journey.
Early in the conversation, you talked about the fear going into this of becoming bored of the food. The way you just described your diet, it is very simple. Have you found that to be a problem throughout this journey?
Oh, I love this question. I have gone on stretches, Jesse, of eating the same meal over and over again for weeks. There was a stretch. In fact, I just did 5 days of chuck roasts in a row. And I can't wrap my brain around it. I totally get it that people are concerned with this being boring. I was the same way. It's not. There's a point in my carnivore journey where I switched from using food as entertainment or pleasure to just fuel. And it's like a switch goes off. And I don't think about the food as entertainment anymore, which is probably our more natural state, right? You know, there's millions of species on this planet. I think humans are the only ones using food for entertainment or pleasure. When that happens, it's so liberating. It's so freeing. It's so hard for people to wrap their brains around. I get it, but I'm just using the food for the nutrients. It's weird because it's like, don't get me wrong, when I eat a big, fatty, delicious ribeye, I love it. I'm like, I'm in heaven. I really appreciate it. But it's not that jonesing for sugar sort of addiction that I used to have. So it doesn't get boring. And every time I eat a steak now, it's like that first bite, I'm like, oh, I'm thankful, grateful, blessed. I feel incredible. So I feel so good. I haven't gotten bored at all on this.
Let's jump into quality. There is a wide spectrum there within the carnivore diet. Certain people saying quality doesn't matter at all, and we can take it from one end of the continuum being something like Spam, hot dogs, and then going all the way to the other side being like a grass-fed, grass-finished steak. How do you look at quality in the way you eat?
I believe that even the lower quality hot dogs and Spam and things like that are probably 1,000 times better than the standard American diet I was eating before. So I guess it's relative to what we're comparing it to. I feel like that is closer to what is natural than anything I was eating before this, and therefore it's much better than that. But I do feel like if people that are watching this, if they can afford it, the better quality is of course better. One of the big epiphanies I've had, and one of the big things I've learned is just about grains, for example. If you feed humans grains, they get sick. If you feed a chicken grain, they're really not supposed to eat grain. That's not their natural diet. So you end up with much larger chickens, and then you have to pump them full of antibiotics because it's what's unnatural for them. And then the meat you get from that chicken, a lot of people have issues with chicken because the chicken are eating things that they're not supposed to eat. Same thing for cows. So a lot of this I started learning later on, but when I eat grass-fed, grass-finished beef, I feel the best that I've ever felt. I feel better than ever before. And it makes sense because that cow is eating its natural diet. So I advocate for people to eat the best quality they possibly can. The real thing that I'm advocating for now that's kind of changed on this whole carnivore journey is it's like, hey, it's not just about eating meat. Whatever you're going to eat, whether it's meat or vegetables, focus on eating what is most natural. And as crazy as it sounds, one of the things I've learned is we can go really unnatural with meat. We can really do that with vegetables and fruit as well. And I think it's a problem that a lot of people underestimate or don't realize how bad it is when we talk about glyphosates and pesticides and defense mechanisms in these fruits and vegetables. I think a lot of these are a larger problem for people than they realize. So really what I advocate for is eating the best quality you can, but trying to do what is most natural. And for me, that's my neighbor lives right down the road. I'm really blessed. He's a 6th-generation farmer. I drive past there all the time. The cows are grazing in the field. They're eating grass. There's nothing more natural than that. So that's what I try to focus on as much as possible.
To make sure I'm super clear on what the current diet is: beef, butter, bacon, eggs. It sounds like tallow. Anything else?
That is it. And actually right now for a couple of weeks, I've been doing lion diet again. So just beef for me, but the 700 plus days on carnivore, it's been beef, butter, bacon, eggs. Every now and then I'd have salmon, maybe once a month, fish. Every now and then I'd have chicken, but every time I do it, I'd be like, this was fun, but I feel better on the beef. So very rarely salmon or seafood, things like that.
How do you feel about venison and other wild game?
I think it's great. I wish I had more access to it. I think some of the wild game, you have to be careful in terms of the fat composition. So you got to make sure to get enough fat or supplement some fat on the side of it. But yeah, just a natural animal in the field. I think that's, again, going back to sort of the first principles I go by, getting as close to natural as we can is definitely ideal.
It doesn't sound like supplements are part of your routine. But do you ever have any supplements, things like vitamin D? I know you're pretty far north. For a lot of people in that area, vitamin D is a concern. How do you feel about supplements?
Yeah, I have supplemented a little bit. When I first started carnivore, I did electrolytes, and I do take vitamin D. I try to get as much natural sunshine as possible, but it is hard where I am right now. You know, that was one of the other things I've learned. Some people will argue, if carnivore is so great, why do you have to supplement? And it's just our world has changed so much. There's this analogy I love talking about, but it's like if you imagine humanity on a football field, that the football field represents all of the time that humans have been consuming or eating things. It's just like a blade of grass on the very end, how most of humanity is behaving right now and what we're doing right now. And one simple example is just water, for example. Like, how can we screw up water? And the water that most humans are consuming right now is so drastically different than the water we've been consuming since the start of time, throughout that whole football field analogy. For as long as we've been breathing air, water has had electrolytes, it's had magnesium in it and things like that, that now it's not in it because the water has fluoride in it, or it's filtered, or it's changed by man so much. So some of this stuff we have to supplement just because the world has been changed so much by man. So I do some supplements. I don't really do any electrolytes anymore, other than I always have in the back of my head, like, you know, if I start getting leg cramps or headaches, I'm going to jump into those electrolytes, but I haven't. I've just felt so good. Every now and then, if I have a big project where I'm going to be doing a lot of exercise or exerting myself, I'll maybe take a little bit of electrolytes. But other than that, I take magnesium every now and then and vitamin D.
Let's come back to the water piece. It sounds like you have something figured out different from the norm in that realm. What are you doing for water for you and your family?
For me and my family, I'm very fortunate. We have well water here, which is typical of what I think man would have consumed for most of time. Like, the water trickles down through the ground, through the rocks, and it picks up all of those minerals. And then we're drinking water that's got those minerals before they're all stripped out. So that's what I'm doing. I've heard other experts talk about maybe doing like a reverse osmosis, but then still you kind of have to supplement some of those minerals that end up getting removed from it. So I try to stick to the well water. If I'm traveling and out and about, I try to get spring water if possible. And avoid some of the other things like that.
So we've gone over the water. We've gone over the couple of supplements, the diet. Given this situation you talked about in the modern world and how atypical it is, and all the conflict that's going on between the environment and our biology, what other things do you do to create a better environment, create better inputs for your body?
Yeah, a huge part of it was, of course, the diet. Once I started eating this way, my body got healthier. The energy started increasing to the point where I feel like I need to exercise. I need to do more. And those are things I've never done. I've never like gone out and jogged or exercised very much. So one of the first things I heard someone talk about grounding, and I thought, just like I thought about carnivore, that's crazy. Like, what, you're going to put your foot in the grass and that's going to help? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I found myself when I would wake up in the morning, I'd have this excess energy. So I was getting up earlier on carnivore and I started going outside. And when I go outside and the sun would hit my eyes, I just felt so good. There's something primal about it. I don't know what it is. I've subsequently done more research and like, yeah, there's a lot of evidence that resets your circadian rhythm. It helps with your sleep. And then it goes back to my first principle again. What would man have done since the start of time? Well, we wouldn't be sitting under shelter all day. We would be getting sunshine. We'd be outside breathing fresh air. So I started doing that. And then I'm like, well, let's just try this grounding thing. That felt incredible. So it just started working into my routine where every morning now I'll get up, I'll go outside, get sunshine in my eyes, get my feet in the grass, go for a walk, hear the birds chirp, breathe the fresh air. And that evolved into just even more of exercising the last several months. Intentionally exercising. I try to keep it as natural as possible. My wife and I, we have 20 acres here. We're kind of in the woods, so we like cutting firewood or doing things outside. But in the Wisconsin winter, it's brutal sometimes. So my girls and I have been going to the gym and doing that more. But everything I do, I just go back to that first principle of what would humans have done since the start of time, whether it's fasting or exercise or whatever I'm putting in my body. The other thing that's changed is what I'm putting on my body. That's another thing. Like I've got tallow in my hair right now. I don't do the chemicals. It's the truth. It's crazy, but I don't brush my teeth anymore. I will sometimes with water, but I don't use any toothpaste or chemicals. I don't use deodorant anymore. It's just, I feel so good. I feel natural. Those are things humans wouldn't have done naturally. Don't use shampoo anymore, which that one, my wife couldn't wrap her brain around, but I'm like, listen, it's like the human body is so incredible. Like, was our human body designed this incredible, but hey, they're going to have to invent some sort of chemical detergent to put in their head every single day when you have these oils and things in your hair anyway, sort of thing. So I feel so good that I don't want to mess with any of that stuff. So I have made quite a few changes outside of the nutrition to, I guess, return to what is natural.
All right. So tallow for the hair, a little bit of water on the teeth with a toothbrush, if you even do that. What about soap?
So the soap, I do use soap. My daughter, Emma, who's also carnivore, by the way, and was vegan for many years. She's the one that got me into this more. Her big thing was she learned about suntan lotion and some of the crazy chemicals that are in the lotion. And that led her down this rabbit hole. And so we have, I think it's a tallow-based soap. We've got good, clean soap. So I do use soap, but it's the good stuff. It's more natural.
And the cool thing is, as this becomes more and more mainstream, there are great products like this tallow soap and all different realms beyond that as well within this space. And the more people are talking about it and adopting a healthier lifestyle, the more and more access we're going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is promising and good to hear. You know, I think a lot of it's just awareness as well. I didn't even really know, like, hey, some of these deodorants, for example, there's like aluminum in them. There's like crazy chemicals. The suntan lotion, some of the ingredients in the suntan lotion. I also didn't realize that when you're putting stuff on your skin, whether it's suntan lotion or like makeup for women, a big majority of that absorbs right into your bloodstream. Like 70%, I think it's some really outrageous number like that. So a lot of it's just awareness, which I wasn't aware of these things. With all of my health issues, the depression and anxiety in particular, I had no idea, Jesse, in a million years that was my nutrition. I thought that was a chemical imbalance in my brain. It was genetics. There's just something wrong with me that I'm going to have to deal with the rest of my life and medicate myself for. But it was all just that awareness of learning that. So
coming into the home, any specific biohacks you use there? And this could be things like a shower filter, sauna, air filters. What have you done to make your home more biohacked for this lifestyle you live?
Yeah, so we got rid of all of our old, a lot of our old cooking items, our pots and pans that have the forever chemicals on them. So switched to cast iron or ceramic. That was a big change we made. The air filters, the circulation in the house, that's another big one that I'm just dipping my toes into now, but I think that's a bigger problem for a lot of people, just sitting in the house breathing recirculated air. So I try to get the more expensive sort of air filters. The other thing I learned this recently, I guess this is a common practice in European countries. There's a certain name for it. I can't remember what it is, but it's basically where you open the doors and windows for maybe like an hour a day, just to let that fresh air come in, even if it's brutally cold out like it is here in Wisconsin. And I've been doing that regularly. We'll let our dogs out in the morning. I just leave the door open and I leave the window open, get that nice fresh air inside as well. So those are several things that we've done. And then almost all of the chemicals that were in our house, whether they were chemicals that we were put on our body, like we talked about earlier, or cleaning supplies, fragrances, things like those are all out or have been changed with something more natural.
Let's take things back to pre-carnivore and talk about what a typical day was back then, because your mental health is in shambles. Physically, again, in shambles there. Were you working at the time? What were you able to do?
Yeah, so I was working. My depression started shortly after one of the most profound moments of my life, and a moment in my life where I really needed to be healthy and energetic. And that was 17 years ago. My wife delivered triplets. So we have triplets plus one. And right after that, my health just declined. I'm not blaming it on the triplets either, by the way. It was just that time of life. I started eating more, and I didn't have time. It was like work. I always worked at a computer job in an office. So I was helping my wife with the triplets, and I was just eating worse food. And so I was working, but the depression just kept getting worse and worse. So the typical day would be getting up, helping my wife with the girls back then, and then I had an hour commute to work, and then I would work and an hour commute back, and I would grab junk food, and it was just fast food, junk food, whatever we can get in kind of as quick as possible. The worst part though was the depression, which just kept getting worse and worse. There were times where I didn't want to be alive anymore. It was horrible. It was hopeless. It's hard to describe to people that haven't experienced depression before. I remember it was really sad. There was a celebrity that had committed suicide, and I was heartbroken hearing that. At the same time, I was kind of relieved for him, because I'm like, man, now you don't have to go through this hopeless suffering anymore that some people don't realize. If you haven't been there before, a lot of people say, oh, you just need to go for a walk or just exercise, that'll go away. But there's a level of depression that I think a lot of people don't understand unless you've experienced it. And that was what I went through for many years of my life. And there's this thing with depression where my whole family knew it was happening, but I don't want to bring my whole family down. So then I have to be kind of this fake phony, try to put on a happy face, when ultimately it didn't work anyways, because they knew it was happening. So that was a large portion of my life for many years. And then my wife's like, we got to get you in. We got to get you help for this. I went in, I got antidepressant medication. They told me this is going to take 3 months before we know if this is going to work or not. I'm like, I don't know if I can go 3 days, let alone 3 months. And unfortunately, it didn't work 3 months later. And then they upped the dosage, and then they changed the dosage to, I ended up being on almost every antidepressant. And I'm like, I tried talk therapy and all of these other things. So it kept snowballing from there. One of the things I've learned, Jesse, is it's like that depression, right? They put me on medication. The medication also contributed to my obesity, because a lot of people, they'll end up gaining weight on these antidepressants. So you have these snowball effects, this cascade. So now my weight goes up, and now I'm starting to have blood pressure issues and more heart issues. Now I need medications for that. And then I need medications for that and that. And you have these satellite medications to the point where, like I said, I was at 15 different medications, and I was just doing everything I could to try to get through the day. And there were some good times where it was like, okay, I'm better now for a little bit of a stretch, but mostly bad times, mostly hopeless times for many, many years.
And when you found carnivore and started this new diet, were you still on 15 medications at that time?
I wasn't quite on 15. I think I was on about 8 or 9 at that time. And antidepressants, medications for my heart, medications for acid reflux, medications for my gout. Some of them I was able to wean off of doing keto. There was a point in time where I was fluctuating between all of them, but right now I'm on 0 medications. And the heart medication took the longest to get off. I was on carnivore for 1 year. And to go back to your earlier question, what a typical day was like, the other part of the typical day was I could barely stand up without fainting. I was lightheaded all the time. In fact, one time I would always get gung-ho and like, we're going to do this big project. We're going to do it. Like one day we were going to cut down a tree for firewood. I went out there, I cut into the tree. I stood up, I was holding the chainsaw and I fell over. And my wife had to call 911. I just completely fainted. And that was my congestive heart failure. My heart just wasn't keeping up with the needs in my body. And all the time, I was always dizzy and always fatigued like that. So about 1 year into carnivore, I started having this crazy energy. And I noticed it at church. That was one constant. Before starting carnivore, we'd go to church, and every time you got to stand up and sing, sit down, stand up and sing, sit down. And every time I'd stand up, I'd get dizzy, to the point my wife and I had this procedure. Like she'd kind of hold my hand and just in case I'd get dizzy. And afterwards, a couple months into carnivore going to church, I'm like, wait a minute, this is crazy. I don't feel dizzy standing up anymore. Like I'm like jumping up now, where before I'm getting up and I'm holding the pew in front of me. So about a year into carnivore, I'm like, I want to go to the cardiologist and just see if something changed with this congestive heart failure, because when I was diagnosed with that, they told me this is chronic. It's never going to get better. You may be able to keep it the same, but you're not going to improve. Your ejection fraction's 44. Your heart can't keep up. You're not going to get better, but here's some medication. So long story short, 1 year into carnivore, I felt incredible, went to the cardiologist, and my congestive heart failure had completely reversed. I was able to get off of all of that medication. And the other thing that's crazy is I've had an irregular heartbeat since birth. I've worn probably 20 different heart monitors. Kindergarten, I had this heart monitor on. Just 2 years ago, I was wearing this heart monitor for this highly irregular heartbeat. It's completely normal on carnivore now. That was 1 year into my carnivore journey. So some of this stuff just blows my mind, but it's like we're doing this documentary, so I'm sharing all of my medical records with people as well, because it's some of it's just unbelievable.
Well, let's talk about that. What was the inspiration? It sounds like this dramatic shift in your health was probably a catalyst for wanting to create this movie and share this message. But talk more about that and when it began along your journey. And taking on a project like that is a big project, a lot of skills needed. Had you ever done any film work before that?
Yeah. Oh, these are wonderful questions. So I hadn't done film work before this, but I've done close. So I've been doing YouTube videos for about 10 years now. And doing a documentary is a completely different operation from doing YouTube. So, but I have done commercial video work for people. So I have a lot of background, I guess, with video. My wife and I also own our small town movie theater. And so I've always loved movies and documentaries since I was a kid. But to be perfectly honest, I decided to do this documentary on day 67 of my carnivore journey. In fact, I announced it on a YouTube video, and I was very naive and I had this crazy carnivore energy. I can do anything now. I'm carnivore. Let's do a documentary. How hard could that be, kind of thing? You know, what I was thinking when I announced it was, I mentioned earlier, I learned about carnivore through a documentary on Netflix, and that was called Fathead. And this was like 15 years ago. This guy, his name was Tim Naughton. He was a stand-up comedian, and he'd never done a documentary, and he kind of did it on like a regular camcorder, and this ended up on Netflix. But it was so powerful because he got into the science, and it was more of the words in the story. So in my head, I'm like, we could just do something like that. Like, I know how to do video stuff, but it has since evolved into something much larger. The reason I wanted to do the documentary was because the changes that I had in my mental health, let alone all of the other things, but mainly in my mental health, that was miraculous to me. And I never would have thought in a million years that I could have improved my mental health through nutrition. And I was hopeless and suffering for so many years. I would have given anything for another tool in the toolbox to do this. Like I said, I tried every SSRI, every antidepressant. And then I started looking around in the world. I'm like, how many other people are there like me that are suffering hopelessly And they don't know. They think that's one of the biggest tragedies to me, is that when you go to the doctor and they say, we don't know, it's just you or it's genetics, we don't know the root cause. And in my opinion, and what I've subsequently learned interviewing people like Dr. Georgia Ede, so much of our mental health is just our nutrition. And I don't think people realize it. So that was why I wanted to do the documentary. Initially, I was just saying, like, there's so many great documentaries on keto. Carnivore is just a strict version of keto, but I don't see any documentaries on carnivore. Let's just do this. Let's see what'll happen. And the last thing I'll say real quick is, the other thing that was so remarkable for me that made me so passionate about this was my daughter, Lily. She's 19 now, but on my 8th day of carnivore, my daughter, Lily, just real quick, she had open heart surgery. She nearly died of blood clots from medication she was on when she was 15. She collapsed in her house. She had to take a helicopter to the hospital. She was literally minutes away from dying. We found her in the bathroom. Her face was blue. Her lips were blue. Her face was white. She had almost died from blood clots she had in her lungs from medication she was on. And she suffered so many things. Like I was looking at Lily and I'm like, this is me. This is her dad. She's having all these health issues way earlier than I am. And she had this skin condition called HS, which is really painful. It was all over her back and shoulders. And she suffered with it for 5 years. And her mom and I took her to all of these dermatologists, specialists, experts, 5 of them. They tried pills, creams, injections, everything, and nothing fixed her. And she came to us crying one time. She's like, I just want to die. This hurts so bad. These doctors aren't helping me. I'm years into this and it still hurts. And this is someone, by the way, like I said, she went through open heart surgery and nearly died from blood clots. And this was a bigger problem for her. When I was on day 8 of carnivore, I said, Lily, I just watched Mikhaila Peterson. You remind me of Mikhaila Peterson. I'm starting to think clear. And I'm like, maybe this skin condition is just the food you're eating. We've tried everything else. Why don't you just try this with me? So she tried carnivore with me. In fact, she did lion diet. And 8 days in, half of her back had cleared up. And 30 days in, all of her HS was completely gone after 5 years of suffering. So that really got me fired up as well, because I started realizing this isn't just, you hear Joe Rogan and some people talk about carnivore as a way to lose weight. And that's great. It is. But the weight comes off because you're getting healthy. And the weight is just a byproduct for so many people. I started realizing just how powerful this is for other things besides weight, mainly mental health, depression, skin issues, autoimmune disorders, fertility. It was like, this is crazy. Like there's so many things that can be healed by doing this. So that's what really fired me up. And I decided to kind of foolishly say, let's do this documentary.
When is it going to be complete? And what are you going to do for release? Put it on YouTube, hopefully sell it to something like Netflix.
Yeah, the idea was, let's get this on Netflix. I want millions of people to see this, and I feel like that would be the biggest platform streaming it. It's going to be released early next year. We're nearly done now. In fact, we just finished filming our 45th interview. We have, sounds like a crazy amount, but it's going to be broken up between the main documentary and we're doing a whole series afterwards. There's just so many stories of healing that we couldn't do it justice in one documentary or it'd be like 8 hours long. So, but early next year, the documentary will be ready. We're nearly done now. And we filmed 10 doctors, experts. We finished filming all of them. The goal is to get it on the big screen first and then do sort of a hybrid version. The ultimate goal is to get it in front of as many people as possible. And so we're trying to get it on the big screen, and then we're going to try to do it on one of the big streaming services. Normally how it works with a documentary is you finish it and then you submit it to film festivals, and then you get the attention of some of these studios to work out some sort of agreement. The interesting thing with our documentary is I'm really fortunate and blessed to, it started out as this crazy idea, like, what are we going to do? And it's really blown up into something bigger. I'm partnering with like some very talented people in terms of making sure the cinematography is top notch. We've filmed Dr. Barry, Dr. Chafee, Professor Thomas Seyfried, and we recently filmed Tammy Peterson, and her husband, Jordan Peterson, watched our teaser trailer and he liked it. And then he ended up tweeting it out. This happened a couple months ago, which just blew my mind. So one of the last big interviews we just did was Tammy Peterson and her incredible story. She's been carnivore 6 years now, and she had terminal cancer, and she's been in remission for several years now. So it's really taken on some huge momentum. It's really gone from just like this little easy idea to something much larger now.
Well, I can't wait to see what you come up with here. It's all very exciting, and I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people. If you have permission, is there a certain story throughout this process that's inspired you that you can share with us?
Absolutely. It's all about the inspiring stories. That's what really is going to set our documentary apart from these others. We're really focused on these individual stories. We're going to have the science in there. We have all the doctors and experts, but the story that stands out, well, there's a couple, but one of them that stands out the most is that of a man named Bill Knott. Bill was 700 pounds and stuck in his house in Alaska for almost 5 years, hadn't walked outdoors. And like me, he was horribly depressed. Of course, you're at 700 pounds, you're going to have some depression, but he saw one of my early YouTube videos where I was talking about carnivore, and he reached out to me and said, man, I'd love to do carnivore. I feel like I'm going to, he said, I see it in my dreams. I'm going to die if I don't change something. I'm 700 pounds. I'm horribly depressed. But meat in Alaska is so expensive. I can't afford meat. Maybe I could do a YouTube video. Well, long story short, we connected, and he was the first person we decided to film. And we decided to follow him for a year on carnivore. And it's crazy because it's like, who knows if he's going to stick to it? Who knows if he's good on camera? All of these things. But my daughter Emma and I flew out to film him 3 weeks after meeting him, captured his initial story. And I remember 3 weeks into carnivore, he called me up crying, like tears of joy. He was so excited. He's like, I feel so good. This pain I had in my back is gone. My mood is improved. And he said, for the first time in years, I actually want to get out of bed. And his depression was just lifting within a couple weeks. And fast forward, we went and filmed him 1 year later. And so this is going to be a big part of the documentary's Bill's story. And 1 year later, he's currently down over 300 pounds. He's outside in the beauty of Alaska, which was, I'm getting teary-eyed, Jesse, thinking about it right now. It was the most profound thing I've ever witnessed, was seeing Bill in Hatcher's Pass, Alaska, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world, putting his hands up in the air, just tears coming down. He was just so thankful and so grateful for his health and for being able to go outside again and for having his life back when he was so close to death at 700 pounds and stuck in his house. He has since, the crazy thing with Bill is he's since created his own YouTube channel, inspiring thousands and thousands of people. There's so many people that are like, if Bill can do this in Alaska with his circumstances, I can do this too. So there's people like, Bill, you saved my life. You sharing your story saved my life. And that's just on his YouTube channel. So his story has been one of the most remarkable, incredible ones. But there's many others as well. Him and there's 3 or 4 people we're following for 1 year. That was going to be the premise of the documentary, but we're following four people for 1 year, and then we have like 40 other people we've interviewed where we're going to touch on their story briefly, and then we're going to cover it more in the subsequent series we're doing.
Incredible story. Wow. So he actually was stuck in his house. Was he living by himself?
He lives on a homestead in Alaska in a house. And when we call it a house, imagine a bedroom in your home. It's like 10 by 12. It's like a shack. It's got a roof. It's got its own. And his brothers had to put in a toilet about 8 feet from the bed. And the only thing he could do, like when he told me he's stuck in his house, I had these expectations. But then when my daughter and I went there to film him, I started to realize more, not only is he stuck in his house, he's stuck in the bed. He's pretty much bedridden. He could just barely get to the toilet. And he couldn't stand up straight because he would sleep crouched over in a 90-degree position. So when he would go to the bed, it was like a hunchback. He had to have his hands on his knees. I even asked him, like, could you just stand up straight for a second? He's like, I can't do it. So he was stuck in there. On the homestead, some of his brothers lived on other properties on the homestead. So they would come from time to time, but he's like, there's times where I don't see people for a couple of days. And I'm like, Bill, what if you fall over going to the toilet? He's like, I'll be dead. That's it. I'm dead. There's no way. Like, unless my brother happens to come in the meantime, he couldn't get up. So yeah, they installed a shower and a toilet in there. And for 5 years, that's it until about 1 year into his carnivore journey, where he finally got to go outside for the first time, it's just incredible.
You mentioned the fact he was on a homestead. Let's talk about the homesteading piece of your journey. And you mentioned the YouTube videos you were making up to 10 years ago. That is the basis of the origin of that YouTube channel. So talk about when that comes into play and what life was like before that.
Yeah, so I've been doing videos on YouTube for 10 years, and most of them have been homesteading until I found carnivore. And now I can't shut up about carnivore. That's all I talk about. But my wife and I and our girls, again, we got triplets plus one. We lived kind of in the city, and I started seeing some YouTube videos from different homesteaders. And I was like, man, maybe that's the answer to all of these issues I have. Get out there, get some fresh air. I always enjoyed meat, and I've always enjoyed eggs. And I was treated every now and then to farm fresh eggs. And I was like, this is so much better than the eggs we get from the store. I wanted to get eggs at our old property, and we couldn't have them for zoning issues. And at that time I worked from home, so we could kind of live anywhere. So we're like, let's look for like a homestead. We can raise our own chickens. Maybe we can support the homestead and do some YouTube videos. And just the freedom of all of that. That was one part of it. But the other part that I've since realized was I didn't like people. I kind of was a hermit. I wanted to get away from people. And so the property we ended up purchasing, it was like the further away we get from the city, the less expensive it is. And the further away we can get from people. So the place we ended up purchasing is wonderful. It was a huge fixer-upper. But there's like, we don't have any neighbors. There's no one around us kind of thing. And so, yeah, we moved in, we built a chicken coop, we got chickens, and all these great plans. And thankfully my wife was able to run with a lot of these grand plans that I have. Like, let's build a chicken coop. I start building the chicken coop. I get too tired, get too fatigued, or the depression. So she'd carry these things through with the girls. But yeah, it was kind of, in some ways, I guess, returning to natural, like we are with carnivore, or an attempt to get away from the city and all the loud noises and things like that, farm fresh eggs. So,
yeah, to me, when I hear the word homesteading, I think self-sufficient, simplicity. How else would you define that?
You nailed it on the head. That was a big one. Now that I'm thinking back, self-sufficient, like what if we can support ourselves entirely from our homestead and we don't have to rely on the grocery store? And this was another thing that maybe sculpted my journey into carnivore was we're like, let's do a garden. We're going to grow all our own food. So the chickens were easy. Raising chickens is actually a lot of fun. They're entertaining too. They run around, they eat the insects, and the eggs are incredible, and they're great. They're very low maintenance. But then we're like, let's start a garden, obviously before carnivore. And I never knew how hard that was. Oh my goodness. I figured, like, I've seen this before. You put a seed in the soil. You got to have good soil. You got to water it, sunshine. We got all of that. We are the biggest gardening failures of all time. We tried so hard over and over again. Our soil is kind of sandy here. So we learned that first. We got to amend the soil. We got to add some stuff in there. That could take a while, composting, things like that. But I think for 5 years, we tried over and over again. And we got a couple like little baby cucumbers and things like that, but it was always a failure, or animals would get in there, pests, things like that, and ruin it for us. So we were able to sort of creatively become somewhat self-sufficient from our homestead, but in a very modern and different way. Our property is a 2-family, so we rented out half of it on Airbnb, and it's like, hey, come stay at a homestead, get farm fresh eggs, hang out with our goats kind of thing. And that really was a great way to sort of passively become self-sufficient because it's bringing in income. And then the other thing we did was we have a little 4-run off-grid dog kennel, because our Airbnb guests would come and they'd have pets or dogs, and we love animals here. My wife does, my girls do, I do. So we started running that as well. So we have been able to leverage it to be self-sufficient in that regard, but a very sort of modern twist on things. Our garden now looks like a desert. It's like, what are we going to put there now? Got to get a cow or something to put it where the garden used to be.
You mentioned the chickens, the eggs. Are you producing any other food, animal products on the homestead?
Just the eggs right now, but that is my big goal for this year. I want to get meat chickens, and a lot of them. And I'm consulting with my 6th generation farmer neighbor. I would love to get a cow at some point, but I want to be very careful, and I want to be a good steward of these animals if I'm going to take it over, and I don't want to get in over my head. So I know we can handle meat chickens, and we have the space for it. In fact, that'll probably be where I was joking about the garden, the spot where the meat chickens are going to go. I think we're going to start with that, and then maybe a hog or something. But eventually I would like to get a lot more. I just want to make sure I'm doing it properly.
Maybe when the documentary is done.
Yes. Yeah. And when I have time to do it and not, because I get these big grand ideas and then my wife ends up doing them all. And she's been managing things while I've been traveling around the world filming this documentary. So try to find that balance.
One thing that becomes really apparent early on as you share everything here is this camaraderie and support of your family. As you have this idea to move to a homestead, embrace a carnivore diet, you mentioned at least one of your daughters jumped on soon after you did. Let's talk about the family integration of all this and the importance of that support as you're making these big changes.
Yeah, it's all about the family for sure. When I first started this, I was all alone. I was literally alone outside on the grill, and my daughter Emma, one of the triplets, she was vegan for 5 years. So she was in the kitchen making her vegan meals. My wife was more vegetarian. She was doing her own thing. My other daughters were in the middle somewhere. So we were all kind of separate and doing our own things. As of right now, my whole family is eating carnivore, which blows my mind. The craziest one was my daughter Emma, who shortly after me decided to go from strict vegan to full-on carnivore. She was really suffering doing vegan. She'd fall asleep at like 5:30 at night. She had acne, depression, just fatigue. And a lot of people will say, like, I forced them. You forced Emma to go from vegan to carnivore. I'm like, I didn't even suggest it to her. I never in a million years. She was so headstrong doing this vegan diet for years and years and years. I never even would have imagined, but she ended up tapping out. And her big epiphany was she started doing more research and realizing that there is actually a lot of damage to animals, deaths, from a plant-based diet. There's something like 70 million birds die a year from pesticide poisoning, fox, squirrel, rabbits. There's a lot of downstream effects from those things. And when she started learning more of that, and then there was one point where we had a discussion and I said to her, I'm like, you know what? I'm not trying to overhype this, but I don't think there's any more compassionate diet than carnivore, the way I'm doing it. You could do it different ways, but if we're getting one cow from our neighbor that's naturally grazing in the field, that one cow dies. It has a good, happy life. We see the cow going through the field, and our family gets hundreds of meals from that one local cow. I don't think there's anything more compassionate than that. Meanwhile, like before Emma, when you were eating vegan or plant-based, you're having a salad and there's all sorts of pesticides on those things. There's downstream effects from all of that different variety you're having, let alone like some of the stuff is shipped in from other countries and then you have the effects on the environment and things like that. So she made a shirt called Compassionate Carnivore, and she's like, I'm gonna try this, but I'm only going to eat meat if I know it has a good and happy life. She's going to try to avoid stuff just, from like a feedlot or a grocery store and try to stick to stuff like from my neighbor where they know that they're doing a good job. So sorry, I tend to ramble. Long story short, the whole family right now is doing carnivore, and it's incredible. And it's incredible to see the difference. My daughter Emma she's up till like midnight now instead of going to sleep at 5:30. Her acne's gone, her mood is improved, and she's just thriving. And I think it's so important because she's 17, almost 18 now, been doing this for almost 2 years. So she's at that formidable year where her brain, her body is still growing, and to be able to put the proper, even if people disagree with the carnivore diet, to be able to put the most natural foods in the earth in her body, and only that, I think is so important. So
you mentioned how your one daughter went from plant-based to carnivore. Along all those years when you were suffering, and I know keto, you attempted that and were on and off that in the period of time before going carnivore. Was the plant-based diet part of this journey for you?
100%. Yes. And I get people now that say, you would have done the same thing, Kerry, if you just got rid of all that junk food. There was a stretch where I think I can confidently say I was probably 90% plant-based. It was like salad for lunch, salad for dinner. I would have low carb vegetables. It would either be cauliflower, broccoli, or something green, and just a little bit of chicken or protein. So I still had a little bit of meat, but there was a stretch for where I did that for a year, and I was able to lose weight doing that, but I still had IBS. My stomach was always gurgling and bubbling and hurting, and I still had the depression and the anxiety. It wasn't until I got rid of those things that all of those things cleared up. So I definitely I'm always careful when I talk to people about this because it's like, yes, of course, if you get rid of the junk food, whether you're going plant-based or carnivore, that's huge. That's a huge part of the puzzle. But I have found for myself and many other people I've interviewed, there is something in some of these vegetables and grains and things that people are eating that even if it's clean, that are still affecting them and still bothering them, that they can't seem to get healthy unless they go full carnivore.
Kerry, I know part of your story is when you were struggling with your health back in the day, you had to have your gallbladder removed. And as somebody now who's eating, only meat basically, high fat, that would be a concern for somebody with a gallbladder. Am I going to overstress my system? You don't have a gallbladder. Talk about if you've had any challenges in that realm.
Yeah. So initially when I started carnivore, I took some ox bile because I was told, which is the truth, like, hey, you don't have a gallbladder, consuming all this fat is going to really mess up your system. I didn't really take it that long. I think maybe like a week, and I was fine. I think for me, because I had dabbled in keto on and off for years, that I was able to adapt quicker. But, the whole gallbladder thing, besides losing my gallbladder, I also had my appendix burst, nearly killed me on the operating room table. I had that removed. I had multiple kidney stones. I have since interviewed so many carnivores, and it's amazing to me how many of them don't have a gallbladder. It is amazing until you learn the science behind it and the job of the gallbladder. And I think the reason that my gallbladder failed, and it failed so many, is because meat and fat has been demonized for so long. I was avoiding it all those years, eating the salad for lunch, salad for dinner, and the lean chicken breast, that my gallbladder's like, what am I doing here? There's no fat coming in. So I think a lot of people are actually losing their gallbladder because we're not eating the natural foods we were supposed to. But I've talked to a lot of carnivores that they're fine on carnivore with no gallbladder, but some of them do need to supplement a little bit with ox bile. And usually the trend I see is it just takes a little bit longer, a little bit of baby stepping into the fat as opposed to just consuming a lot of it quickly. But your body adapts. And I don't know anyone that's been doing it for a long time where they have to continue the ox bile. It's like we did that for a couple of weeks and then that was it. And then my body adapted and now I'm fine. The only weird thing I noticed with the fat is, like I mentioned earlier, rendered fat, not so great on my digestive system, but cold fat, like if I eat a cold piece of butter, perfect. Melted butter, some stomach issues sometimes if I do too much of that.
And you're okay with tallow?
I'm okay with tallow. Yeah. It's a primary part for sure.
Kerry, it's obvious listening to you, the excitement, the passion you have about this diet and lifestyle. And I'm sure in the early days, as your health started to really transform, including your mental health, which was your biggest roadblock in life, the excitement you must have had at that time must have been just so profound. So talk about what that felt like in the early days, and then if you still feel it the same way today, or if you have to kind of check in every once in a while and have gratitude for how far you've come.
Yeah. Oh, I was so excited. I still am. And I was very passionate about this because just the darkness and the hopelessness that I was in, going from that to having hope. And it wasn't just that, like I would have given anything when I was so hopelessly depressed just to be normal. I remember I used to think about this all the time. I just want to be like that person where they're just kind of normal. And the thing that happened for me that was so remarkable was I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum of hopeless, horrible depression. Like I am full of joy and gratitude. I want for nothing anymore. And it's hard not to be passionate about that, especially when I look around in the world now and I see the world differently now that I'm doing this. Maybe I see it a little bit more clearly because I don't have that brain fog anymore. But just seeing so many people suffering, I think in particular for me, it's like my children, my daughter Emma had some depression and anxiety. And then you see her peers, this next generation coming up. The incidence and rates of depression and mental health issues, it's horrible, and it's only getting worse. It's Dr. Eid, we interviewed for the documentary, and she's like, it's grim out there. But this weird thing happens with our human brains where we just normalize things. That's just the way it's always been. And I've been very careful on my carnivore journey to try not to normalize this. So writing things down, not taking it for granted, like, this is incredible. I don't have any brain fog today. This is incredible. I don't have the arthritis in my foot. The IBS is gone. So I do constantly try to remind myself of that. One way I do that is maybe like an alcoholic that's overcome alcoholism. I track how long I've been on my carnivore journey by the day. So today is day 710. And I'm going to do that for the rest of my life. And some people think it's weird or whatever. I don't care. It reminds me, it constantly reminds me of where I've at and how far I've come and not to kind of slip back that way. But it's hard not to be passionate about this too, when just seeing things more clearly when you look around in the world right now, and it's like 7 out of 10 people are overweight. I think it was something like 1 in 3 kids have fatty liver disease. Some of these stats is like, it should blow people's mind, but you hear it over and over again, or it happens slowly. And it's just like, oh yeah, that's just the way it's always been. 9 out of 10 people have poor metabolic health. It's like the world is so sick right now, but we just kind of go along with the flow. And it's like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. But I can't ignore it. I go to the grocery store, I look around, and I don't judge people. I just think, man, we have the answer right here. Here's the key. Your life could be so much better. It keeps me going, realizing that the majority of humanity is kind of in this brain fog, this fatigue. They all have illnesses and aches and pains and inflammation, and my shoulder hurts, and it's all unnecessary. And when you can think clearly and live your life to the fullest potential, which it's not just me, I hear this over and over again from other carnivores. It's such a shame that the majority of humanity will go their whole life and they're never going to feel that. So that's one of the reasons I'm passionate about it. But the other thing is, since talking about this on my YouTube channel, it's been crazy. It's been crazy. The stories, the testimonies, I had a comment yesterday. They're like, Kerry, I saw your 90-day carnivore video. It saved my life. I've been depressed for 20 years. My depression's completely gone. They're like, everything you were talking about, like, I didn't believe you. It's right there. I have heard so many stories like that over and over and over again. And I know people will say, well, those are just anecdotes. But I love what Dr. Jordan Peterson said, because he is the most famous carnivore out there, right? With the biggest following. And he's like, tens of thousands of people are coming up to him telling him, I went carnivore like you did, like you talked about on Joe Rogan, and my depression is gone. My depression is gone. Like, at what point is it no longer an anecdote and a data point? So in terms of my passion for this, it's only increasing, especially as I get closer to the end of the documentary, because we were almost done with it. And then it's like, we got to include this story too. It's so powerful. And then more come out. The last thing I'll say real quick is one of the reasons we're just a little bit more delayed on the documentary, instead of putting a line in the sand, was we're going to be filming Hal Cranmer, the gentleman that is running long-term care facilities, and he's feeding the residents carnivore keto diet and sending them home. They're literally going back home. And their markers for these different issues like dementia and Alzheimer's, they're reversing them by changing their nutrition. So it's like, we got to have him in the documentary too. So my passion just continues for this the more I go.
As you talk about counting the days, now you're at 710, it gets me thinking long out in the future. When you get to, say, 2,000, 3,000, could you ever see a day that you decide to introduce a more diverse range of foods into your diet? Even things like other dairy options like milk and yogurt. I know right now it's just butter. But depending on how this all plays out and how good you feel for whatever period of time, could you see that ever happening?
Yeah. If I had to bet on it, it probably wouldn't happen. I could see it happening if there was something out there that made me feel better or be healthier than what I'm currently doing, then I would do it. I don't think there is anything currently out there that is. I know that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their brains around, like, dude, just eat some broccoli or something like that. But I heard Dr. Chaffee say this early on. He's like, you literally get every single nutrient, mineral, everything you need to thrive and survive from a fatty piece of meat. And you don't need anything else. And that isn't exaggerating. That's all I've done for 710 days. And I've never felt better my entire life. So incorporating things back in isn't something I've thought about. It would have to be something that is completely natural and that would help make me feel better. In terms of the long term, though, 2,000 days from now or years from now, one thing that's been kind of interesting for me is my why has really changed. Initially, my why for doing this was overcoming the depression, losing the weight, all of those health issues. I've healed everything. I'm on no medications. I feel better than I have my entire life. So there's really a lot of people get to this point on carnivore, and then it's like, well, let's just go back to moderation. And for me, my why really changed into focusing on the long term. And I don't feel there's any way for me to live a long and healthy life and be there for my wife in our old age, be there for my girls, walk them down the aisle someday, than eating the most natural foods in the world. And given the kind of broken system we're in now, I think that's just meat. So that's probably what I'm going to continue to do unless something else better comes along.
For somebody that's tuned into this point, they're feeling inspired. You've given them the roadmap of the simplicity of this diet and lifestyle, but they're on the fence and they just need that little bit of a nudge and that feeling of hope to begin the journey. What would you say to them?
I would say, try this for 30 days. Consider it a strict elimination diet. Tell yourself the truth, which is, I'm going to eat the most natural foods possible given the options. I'm going to just do that for 30 days and then you can do whatever you want after that, because you do not want to go your entire life, get to your last breath, the last beat of your heart, having never felt this way before. The other thing I would say too is watch some other stories out there. There are other stories out there that are like you, people that have the same concerns and the same issues as you. And there's so many stories out there. That was one of the big things I realized, Jesse, was like, carnivore isn't what saved my life. It was a story. It was Dante bravely sharing his story. Stories are so powerful. That's the reason I'm doing the documentary. It's like, let's just get as many stories out there to the world that we can. But I think stories are what can inspire people that are maybe on the fence. It's like, there's someone out there that you can relate to that's been through what you're considering. So go out there and do some research and watch some of those stories. I think those would help inspire you as well. But the biggest thing I'll say is 30 days is a blink of an eye in terms of the grand scheme of your life. It is nothing. I'm on day 710 right now, and it doesn't seem like that much. So you can do anything for 30 days, and you deserve to feel like a proper human, like the best you can possibly feel, at least for a day in your life. So it'd be a shame if you didn't.
As you shared your journey, it sounded like as time went on and fairly quickly, it was all upside with your health. But do you find that when people come to your channel and share their stories, that there is sometimes a longer lag period or a period where somebody even has setbacks before they have the breakthroughs?
Right. I always say 30 days to people, because even if they haven't healed all of the things, and I didn't within 30 days, they normally have enough where it's like, whoa, something's happening here. Let's just go to 60. Like, I hear that over and over again. Honestly, I would say to people, like, maybe try for 90 days. But it is a very good point. I almost feel like I need a disclaimer on my videos, on my YouTube channel, to say what you're about to see is not normal. Like, I experience things quicker than a lot of people. And I think it's because I was in and out of keto so much. But to give you a prime example, my wife is now carnivore. She's coming up on a year, and she was vegetarian for 5 years, and she's doing amazing. She's down over 50 pounds, couple dress sizes, but nowhere near as fast as the progress that I had. And everyone's on their own unique journey. Someone was saying something, the carnivore community is amazing. They're wonderful. It's almost all positive, but every now and then you get a hateful comment. And she got a comment like, you should be much further along or something like this. And I just said to her, I said, you birthed triplets. Like, what sort of trauma does that put on your body, on your liver? You have your own journey. You were a vegetarian. You've always hated meat. My wife ate almost strictly vegetarian her whole life, and now she's strict carnivore. So I'm like, you're on your own journey. You have your own things to heal. And so it's different for everyone. So yeah, I got to be careful. I usually do say 30 days because that'll get people hooked, but really commit to 90 if you can. But most people end up feeling better right around 30 or so.
Kerry, I want to thank you for coming on, sharing your inspiring story. We're going to link up the documentary, your YouTube channel, social media, everything in the show notes. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
No animal eats the variety of plants that we do, and I think that that's causing and driving most of the modern non-communicable chronic diseases that we face these days.